The room felt colder than the air conditioner could explain. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above, casting a pale glow over the framed awards and certificates on the walls. In the middle of the office sat a heavy wooden desk, polished to a shine, with a badge, a nameplate, and a stack of reports neatly arranged on top. Across from that desk sat a man in a neatly pressed uniform. Dark skin, tired eyes, shoulders squared even though his hands were clenched just enough to show how hard he was trying to stay calm. He had spent nearly 10 years wearing that badge. He had spent his 20s breaking up fights no one else wanted to touch, walking neighborhoods where people did not trust uniforms, trying to prove that at least one officer would listen. Now he stared at the man sitting across from him and tried to keep his voice steady. The chief leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his chest. His uniform was flawless, his hair perfectly trimmed, his badge shining like it had never seen a dirty street in its life. "Do you know why you are here?" the chief asked quietly. The officer nodded once. "Because I corrected a lie," he replied. "On camera." The chief's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone," he said. "You are not in the patrol car. You are in my office." The officer took a breath through his nose and let it out slowly. "With respect," he said, "I am here because I refuse to lie about what happened to that boy." Silence stretched for a moment. Behind the chief's desk, a muted television screen showed a news channel with subtitles. On the screen, grainy footage from a phone camera replayed the moment that had brought them here. Crowd gathered on a sidewalk. A young black teenager, hands raised. An officer shouting. Then the teenager pushed against a wall and handcuffed while neighbors shouted into their phones. What the news did not show was everything that happened before and after that clip. But there was one thing the officer could not forget. The teenager had not resisted. He had been scared, shaking, but he had obeyed every single order. The problem started later, inside the report room. The officer turned his eyes away from the television and back to the chief. "You changed my report," he said. The chief's eyes flashed. "I edited your report," he replied, "because you left out details." "I left out lies," the officer said quietly. "I wrote exactly what happened." "You wrote something that makes this department look weak," the chief shot back. "We do not bend to public pressure. We control the story." The officer stared at him. "We are not supposed to control the story," he said. "We are supposed to tell the truth." The chief slapped his palm on the desk. The sound was sharp in the small office. "You are out of line," he snapped. "First you embarrass an officer in the middle of the street by telling him to calm down, in front of civilians. Then you let somebody record you while you defend a suspect. Now you come into my office and accuse me of lying." "That boy was not a suspect," the officer replied. "He was a kid walking home. He did nothing wrong." "He refused to give his ID," the chief said. "He was 14, the officer answered. "He said he did not have one. That is not a crime." The chief gave a short, cold laugh. "You have been working here long enough to know this," he said. "People like him become a problem if you do not set them straight early." The officer's heart hammered in his chest. "People like him. That is the problem," he said quietly. "You see people like him. I see a child." The chief glared. "You have been getting bold lately," he said. "Talking back in meetings, questioning decisions, acting like you are some kind of hero." The officer held his gaze. "I am acting like someone who still remembers why he put this uniform on," he said. The chief's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you are the only one here who cares?" he asked. "I have been doing this job longer than you have been alive." "Then you should know better," the officer replied. The chief's chair scraped as he stood. "That is it," he said. "You are done." The officer blinked. "What do you mean?" The chief pointed at the badge pinned to his chest. "You are finished here," he said. "Turn in your badge and your gun. Effective immediately." The room seemed to tilt for a second. "You are firing me?" the officer said slowly. "For telling the truth?" "I am firing you," the chief replied. "For insubordination, for talking back, for undermining this department in public, for embarrassing an officer on duty. You are lucky I am not pressing charges. The officer could feel every muscle in his body tighten, then slowly relax as he forced himself not to react. If you fire me for this, he said, it will come out. The chief smirked. You think the public will care what you say? He asked. They will forget about this video in a week. People always move on to the next outrage. The officer looked at the television screen again. The clip was still looping. The boy's frightened face, the officer's calm voice trying to de-escalate, the other officer's anger. Maybe they forget, the officer said softly. But that boy will not. His mother will not. His neighbors will not. The chief moved around the desk until he stood right in front of him. Take off the badge, he said. Now. For a long second, no one moved. Then the officer reached up, unpinned the badge from his chest, and set it down carefully on the desk. He placed his service weapon beside it. His hands felt strangely light and heavy at the same time. You are making a mistake, he said quietly. The chief smiled a small, satisfied smile. I run this department, he said. I do not make mistakes. The officer rose slowly from his chair. There was so much he wanted to say. How many nights he had gone home with his uniform soaked in sweat and rain. How many times he had stood between angry neighbors and angry officers and tried to be a bridge. How many times he had swallowed humiliation and disrespect because he told himself the job mattered more than his pride. But in the end, he just looked the chief in the eye and said, one day, the truth will walk into this office. You will not see it coming. He turned and reached for the door. The chief called after him. You walk out that door, he said, and do not come back. The officer opened the door. What neither of them expected was to find someone already standing outside. A woman stepped back quickly to avoid being hit by the door. She was in a dark suit, hair pulled neatly back, a folder tucked under one arm. She had been about to knock. The officer froze for a moment, then stepped aside. Sorry, he murmured. Her eyes flicked to his uniform with the missing badge, the empty holster, the tightness in his jaw. She studied his face for a beat longer than polite curiosity would require. Then her gaze shifted past him and locked onto the chief behind the desk. The chief's expression changed. Mayor, he said, straightening his shoulders. I was not expecting you so soon. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. And I was not expecting to see a good officer walking out of your office without a badge, she replied. The chief gave a thin smile. Internal matters, he said. Department business. Nothing for you to worry about. Please have a seat. She did not sit. Instead, she turned to the officer. Can you wait right outside for a moment? She asked. I may need to talk to you. Her tone was calm, but there was something firm underneath it. The officer nodded. Yes, ma'am, he said. He stepped into the hallway, but he did not go far. The door remained slightly open. From where he stood, he could hear some of what was being said inside. Close the door, please, the chief said. The mayor did not move. I prefer it like this, she answered. We both know sound travels in these halls anyway. The chief's voice hardened slightly. What brings you here today? He asked. You could have called. She opened the folder in her hand and placed a few printed pages on his desk. I did call, she said. Your secretary told me everything was under control, that the situation from last week was being handled internally. Yet this morning I received 3 separate emails from community leaders and a very long message from a mother who watched her son thrown against a wall. The chief's eyes narrowed. We are following protocol, he said. The officer involved has been cleared. The boy was uncooperative. That is not what the video shows, the mayor replied. She picked up a remote from the corner of his desk and pointed it at the television. The same clip that had been looping silently flickered again onto the screen, this time with sound. Stop! You do not belong here, shouted one voice. Please, he did not do anything, cried another. In the middle of the chaos was the calm voice everyone in that room recognized. Sir, stand down, The officer on the screen said. He is just a kid. Let me talk to him. The mayor watched the recording with no expression on her face. She had clearly already seen it many times. When it ended, she turned back to the chief. Do you know what people are saying? She asked. The chief shrugged slightly. People are emotional, he said. They do not understand how these situations work. They understand enough to see who was trying to calm things down, she replied. They also understand when someone changes a report. The chief shifted. Excuse me? She tapped the papers on his desk. I requested copies of both versions of the incident report, she said. The one originally written by your officer and the one that left this building. The differences are interesting.